Almost in June. It's almost summer, guys. Another episode of the Incline Dodgers podcast. This is your host, Kevin Klein, speaking. We're actually doing things a little different today. We've had a lot of questions throughout the season about the whole scandal and fiasco circulating around Shohei Ohtani and his former interpreter, Ippei Mizuhara. And I'm glad to be joined today by Sam Mangel, a federal prison consultant who's been featured on CNN as well as works in New York Times, Business Insider, and other featured journalist tracks. Sam, how you doing today?
Busy. As I think I mentioned to you before we started, I have the opportunity to be one of the few in one of the few industries that is what I consider to be recession-proof and AI-proof. In that, similar to a doctor, people always will get sick and need doctors, and people tend to get themselves in trouble and run afoul of the law. And it doesn't matter what country you're from, what socioeconomic bracket you're in. Probably 30% of my practice are now foreign nationals. So this niche of helping people get through what is probably, other than death in the family, the worst time of their lives is fascinating, interesting, and very satisfying when it works out.
Awesome to hear. So, Sam, how did you get into this?
Interesting story. So in 2016, briefly, I received a knock on the door, 17 FBI agents, men and women with guns, jackets, stenciled FBI were there. And I had no idea why. Turns out an incident from 4 years earlier arrested me on the spot, charged me with wire fraud. 2 years later, I was taken in front of a judge. And after spending $500,000 on my lawyer in Philadelphia and guaranteed probation, promised I would walk out of there that day with a slap on the wrist. I had never been in trouble in my life. I just remember the judge looking down at me and saying, and these words are ingrained in my mind, "Mr. Mangel, you are no different than any vagrant on the street. You are actually worse. Clearly, you're intelligent and come from a well-educated background, yet you show no remorse, no contrition, no understanding of what you did." And after 30 minutes, he said, "I'm going against all recommendations and I'm sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison. And by the way, we're remanding you now to custody," where I was shackled, taken to the bowels of the Philadelphia Detention Center. 6 weeks later, I wound up at the camp in Miami. And in Miami, I met people that had much better outcomes than me. And the resounding theme were not that they paid more or paid less to an attorney, but they had worked with a consultant that guided them through the process, understood the pitfalls and pros and cons on everything that they did, both before sentencing and after. And across the board, their result was dramatically better than mine. So one visiting day into my sentence, I said to my wife and my daughter, they said, "What are you going to do when you come home?" And I said, "I'm going to be a consultant." And they looked at me like a deer in the headlights. "What do you mean? Don't you want to get out of this industry? Forget about prison?" And I said, "No, I think I can help people." So I left prison. I decided this is what I wanted to do. I interviewed about 5 different companies to join. One company, which is actually out just south of Los Angeles, I decided to work for about 2 years. And I left them because I found that they were very transactional. In other words, they were just selling products. You can go to them and buy a character letter or buy something specific, but it was very hands-off. And there was no true consulting or getting to know your clients or really guiding them at each step of the way. And today, in an article in Semaphore, they wrote an article about me and one of my more high-profile clients and termed me the prison concierge. Oh, wow. So I decided that what I wanted to do was really take a hands-on approach with my clients and not be everything to everyone, but to the clients that I choose to work with and that I find could use my help. That's my approach. And that's why, even if they're foreign nationals or U.S. citizens, when I'm retained by somebody, it's really all in.
Wow, that is a fascinating story. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so transitioning now to Ippei, this is a very interesting matter. I feel like it's escalated very quickly from kind of just stealing a couple millions to now it's looks like it's going to be set up for some serious federal prison time, unless I'm mistaken here, Sam. But from what I understand, the Justice Department did a thorough investigation. Bank fraud charges are one of the things brought to our attention that Ippei committed, as well as, stealing and the sports gambling, of course. So, Sam, how do you think this process is going to play out?
Everything in the justice system, in the federal criminal system, is a system of points. So points are based on a few different factors: the number of charges you have, the severity of the charge, and in the example of a white collar crime, the amount of dollars or loss involved, the amount of drugs, the quantity of the drugs. So in Ippei's situation, I did some research this morning on his docket. He has about 26 points. Now, points reflect or refer to a sentence guideline range. In other words, it says to a judge that given the defendant's situation, the loss, the dollar amount, the victims involved, victim impact, prior criminal history, everything about that defendant, what does the judge have the latitude or recommended guidance range for that defendant? And while it's strictly a recommendation, the judge can go higher. For instance, in my case, he went 4 years higher, or in most cases can go lower. It really says to a judge, for all defendants in this guideline range, here's what we would recommend the government, the sentencing commission, that you sentence him to. In this case, I think off the top of my head, 26 points comes out to about 8 years, 96 months. And it said that Ippei, given his current situation, the amount of the loss, which I think is in excess of $16 million, plus there's an IRS loss of about $1 million. While it is his first-time offense, the fact that he took advantage of a vulnerable victim, Shohei, who brought him to the United States, hired him, trusted him, and took advantage of him. So when there's a vulnerable victim that he took advantage of with this dollar amount, in many cases, the judges frown upon that. And really, it's hard for me to say what will happen. My best guess is he's going to probably get a sentence in the 6 to 8 year range. But it's more than just the sentence. Because he's not a U.S. citizen, there's a lot more that goes into what will happen to him, where he can serve his sentence, and what happens post-sentence. And it's typical of all non-U.S. citizens. In his case, it's going to be a stark awakening and really challenging for him.
Yeah, there's just so much going on here, and I do feel like there's still some questions that we still need answers on. But one of my questions for you is: so why would someone who it's pretty obvious that he committed these crimes plea not guilty during the first sentencing? Is that to get a lesser punishment?
99% of the time on a federal charge, the defendant pleads not guilty at their arraignment, which is their first hearing. That's because it gives many times in an arraignment, and I know in my arraignment, when I was just brought to the courthouse within an hour of being arrested, I had no idea what I was being charged with. I had no idea who was charging me. At the arraignment, the judge reads your charges, but the defendant either may not have an attorney. The attorney is certainly not up to speed. The defendant's not up to speed. So 99% of the time, the defendant will plead not guilty. That enables the judge to set pretrial conditions, travel restrictions, if there's going to be bond, if the defendant's going to be remanded to custody pending sentencing. What needs to occur between an arraignment and sentencing could be maybe the defendant truly wants to go to trial. Again, 98% of all federal charges lead to a conviction, whether through plea or a trial. But many defendants, and certainly as an example myself, at their arraignment, we're fighting the government. We didn't do anything wrong. We think we can take on the 800-pound gorilla. And I remember walking into my attorney the first day after I hired him and cashed my substantial check. And I said, Larry, we're going to fight this. I didn't do anything wrong. And he said, yes, absolutely. Thank you for your check. 6 weeks later, I remember getting a phone call from him, and he said to me, we're accepting a plea. I said, what do you mean? We just discussed, we're going to win this case. I didn't do anything wrong. And he said, Sam, let me explain to you how the government works. They have all the time in the world, all the money in the world. And when you get a jury of 12 men and women in inner city environment, and they see a defendant that comes from what they believe to be a privileged background, a background that's different than theirs, it's much easier for them to convict. And many times juries simply don't understand, especially in white collar matters, the charges themselves. There's accounting involved. And sometimes it's easier just to convict on one charge or two charges. So defendants, when they realize that the odds are so greatly stacked against them, which usually happens sometime between the not guilty plea and a plea, an acceptance of a plea, the defendant really, that's where the rubber meets the road. So totally standard for Ippei to have pled not guilty, gives he and his attorneys time to digest it. Plus, it gives them time to negotiate a plea. Because remember, when you go into an arraignment hearing, there might be 10 charges leveled against you. But a good attorney will negotiate with the government and usually narrow it down to one charge, and they drop the other charges. Because if there's more than one charge, your points can go up. So the government's just interested in the win. They don't need stacking of charges. So that's why you plead not guilty, you negotiate, you address, you learn, you really, it's all about negotiating and coming out with the best possible plea, if that's the direction you go, to eventually accept the plea, which in his case is what he did.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for breaking that down. And then I don't know if you're able to answer this because it could be a very complex question, but when they said this was a thorough investigation, do you have any insight as to just how much time, resources, who was involved? Because it seems like with every week we're getting more and more information. We just learned, I think last week, a lot of where Ippei was doing his betting was in Las Vegas. So to me, one, I guess, why did it take so long for people to get on this? And then two, just kind of like, how did all this get revealed?
When the government initially charges someone, they might not have all what's called relevant conduct or everything that might grow out of the case. A lot of times it's called fruit of the poison tree. So they might charge somebody with one set of facts. And as the case evolves, sometimes you see what's called a superseding indictment, where the defendant hasn't accepted a plea, they pled not guilty, and the government continues to build evidence. Now, in this case with Ippei, he's already accepted a plea. The government's already said, pretty much stopped the clock and said, okay, here's everything we know. We're not going to bring any additional charges regarding this matter. Now, of course, if he breaks the law again or violates, yes, he's subject to additional charges. But in this matter, the government has said, here's everything that we're charging you with. Here's the dollar amount, and that's it. The clock is done. Other factors will come to light. You might have other witnesses that come to light. You might have other defendants. I know he was betting supposedly through a third party, an individual that was running the bets to Vegas.
Yes.
So the tree will grow, and that's typical of matters like this. They might find other people that were involved. We don't know, but as far as Ippei is concerned, he is now going to face the charges as he pled to them in his plea agreement, and that's it. However, there's still a lot of factors that will play into his sentencing. He's going to have, if he hasn't already had, an interview, generates a pre-sentence report. That report tells everything to a judge about your history, your education, your employment, prior criminal history, and your charges. At some point, Shohei is going to have to make a decision. Does he want to get up in front of a judge and say, please offer leniency? In other words, not portray himself as a victim that was irreparably harmed? Does he want to go to his friend's side and say, this was a I forgive him. I forgive him. And when you have a victim that does that, sometimes that impacts the judge. Now, a judge typically has seen that in the past, but that might be the only saving grace he has. He certainly does not have the financial wherewithal to repay his victim as well as the IRS. We know that. That's close to $18 million. But when you have victims that are willing to come to court and say, something in a positive way about the defendant, that bodes better than a victim that comes in and says, he stole from me. I put my trust in him. I believed him. And look what he did Look what he did to me.
Great. Well, you just teed up. You just answered what was going to be my next question, which was involving Shohei Ohtani. So I'm glad you dove into that realm, because I was going to wonder if Ohtani was going to get involved. But clearly, because he's the victim, I would imagine then, yes, he will appear at court, and then it's going to be in his court whether he wants to forgive him, like you mentioned, or give him the harshest punishment as possible. But speaking of Shohei Ohtani, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there that he's involved in the betting. He's in on this. But from everything I understand and what I've read, the Fed has cleared him of all charges. So I'm going to ask you this question. When the Fed says he's innocent and they've cleared him, how valid is that point?
I believe in this instance, given the notoriety of Shohei, the last thing that the Fed would want to do is put their foot in their mouth. If it's Joe Schmo defendant and they make a statement to their attorney, you're clear. I think there's a lot less of a risk of going back on that. But when a AUSA, a federal prosecutor or U.S. attorney says we're clearing that person, especially a superstar like Shohei, somebody who's so well known, I would say there's zero chance, very low chance of him being involved or having anything culpable. And getting back to what you mentioned about his appearance, he doesn't have to appear at sentencing. It's called victim impact statement. He is absolutely welcome to get up at sentencing and make a statement. It could be a positive statement. It could be a negative statement. I don't know. But whatever the statement is will affect the judge and how the judge possibly views the defendant. Now, the other victim is the IRS. I can guarantee the IRS is not going to get up and say, oh, well, we know he pays a nice guy, and yeah, he took $1.2 million from us, and we're going to excuse that just because. No, that's not how it works. So it could have a helpful effect, but given his breach of trust, I think it's going to be de minimis.
Cool. Thank you for clearing that up. Good insight. And
I also think one thing that foreign nationals don't understand is that when they commit a crime in the United States, a federal crime in the United States, there's a lot of misconception about camps and the term Camp Cupcake, and white collar criminals go to Club Fed or things like that. Foreign nationals don't qualify for that because and it clearly says in his plea agreement, at the end of their sentence, and there's some nuances to it with treaty transfers that we help our clients with, but the genesis is at the end of his sentence, whenever that might be, he's going to be deported. He's going to have an ICE detainer, immigration detainer, and be deported, and will forever be prohibited from entering the United States again. So, and he's not eligible for a camp. He's going to have to go to a low security facility. Low security facilities have walls. They have controlled movements. They have people that are there for violent charges and sex offenders. So he's going to be facing some challenges unique to non-U.S. citizens.
It's like you read my mind. I was about to ask you what's next for Ippei, but I think you pretty much covered it. But based off what it looks like the potential charges are going to be, is there a shot he can come back to the U.S., or do you think he's toast?
Okay, so he can apply after a few years to come back. Yeah. I would say the likelihood of getting an approval or a waiver is zero. There are so many hoops to go through. Well, first of all, so you understand, let's just say choose a number. He gets 6 years. Typically, people that get 6 years that are non-U.S. citizens, they're eligible for the 15% credit, good time credit, and they're eligible for what's called earned time credits under the First Step Act. So conceivably on 6 years, maybe he'll serve roughly 4 years before he's being deported, maybe a little less. He can apply for a treaty transfer. These are all things that we help our clients that are non-U.S. citizens with. And as long as the country in South Korea or Japan does have an agreement with the United States for treaty transfer, he can go back to Japan and serve out the balance of his sentence if he wants, as long as Japan will take him back. But he's still going to be under the thumb of the U.S. justice system for the period of his sentence. And once his sentence is over, he's going to have to be responsible for restitution, even if he's living overseas. They're going, he owes that money. Is it easy to collect overseas? No. I don't know how the garnishment works overseas, but I would say the likelihood of him coming back to the States, probably next to zero.
Got it. Sam, was there anything else that we didn't cover regarding this current situation with Ippei? I feel like we dove pretty deep into it, but there might be something I missed.
I would say if he or his attorney or if his friends or even if Shohei Ohtani's listening, he's facing a real uphill battle now. And while the judge will impose a sentence that the judge feels is adequate, he really could use the guidance of where should he serve that sentence. There are many low security facilities in the United States that are better than others. When we have non-U.S. citizens, we try to get them in one of 4 low security facilities in the United States because they're better. They tend to house more foreign national white collar criminals, defendants, than others, that are safer than others, that have more programming, that are better with treaty transfer, that might have an immigration judge in the facility. So if his goal is to put this behind him and get back to Japan as quickly as possible, I strongly suggest that he considers working with knowledgeable people that can not only help him get to a safer, better, more productive facility, but also transition from that facility. First of all, make his time as useful and productive as possible in that facility. But once he gets there, if he chooses to get home as quickly as possible, it's not a matter of just throwing him into prison and say, when ICE comes and gets you, they get you. No, he has an opportunity to be productive and to get out as quickly as possible and return to Japan. It's up to him if he wants to afford himself of the knowledge and people that can help him with that. So as I advise everyone, especially non-U.S. citizens, don't throw in the towel. No pun intended. There are resources out there that you can use and help yourself to get the best possible outcome, not just at sentencing, but after sentencing, and get back to a life or your life and your family as quickly as possible. And look, it's a horrible situation. I certainly think that what he did was a terrible thing to do to a friend or do to anyone. But in the scheme of things, he's a young man, and I think he has an opportunity to not only try to redeem himself, both in the eyes of his former employer, but in his family and his country. You can't do that from inside prison. You got to get back to your life as quickly as possible and start that path of redemption. And I think that's what he has to consider.
Good stuff. There you go, everyone. There is a chance for Ippei to redeem himself. Well, Sam, obviously this is a Dodgers podcast. We cover baseball. So my last question for you is, do you have any ties to baseball? Are you a fan of any team growing up? Anything along those lines?
So my friends and I were teasing me. I'm from Philadelphia, so of course it's the Phillies.
Okay.
The last Phillies game I went to was when they won the World Series. When they had a rained out Game 5, I think, and we had to come back for it. The time before that I was at a Phillies game was way before you were born. I think it was 1980 against the Kansas City Royals when George Brett had a physical issue and couldn't play, and the Phillies won. So I don't have the patience to sit through 9 innings or 9 innings plus to watch it. But, I think that whatever he can do, and he'll have opportunities and get back to Ippei. He'll have opportunities inside to expand his horizon educationally, physically. He should take advantage of it.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, the Phillies, they are a good team this year. So maybe the Dodgers and Phillies will meet in the NLCS. We'll see. Sam, want to thank you again for coming on the Incline Dodgers podcast today. And if you want some more information on Sam, you can go to his website, which is sam-mangel.com. Mangel, MANGEL.com.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. That's the Incline Dodgers podcast, everyone. Make sure you're subscribing wherever you listen to the audio feed, and you'll hear from us very soon covering some more Dodgers baseball.